Hello, welcome to Starfinder Wednesday. I'm developer Jason Keeley, and with me is Thurston Hillman, man of the hills, joining us via computer stuff.
I want to point out where I live, there's no hills. In fact, that's like the big thing about where I live. There's no hills.
Yeah, so how is the weather up in Canada?
We're supposed to get 10 to 15 centimeters of snow tonight, so that's cool.
Wow. Ooh, well, stay warm, stay safe,
hmm
and stay golden. I guess. So, today we're going to be talking about Hive of Minds, Starfinder Adventure Path number 23, the fifth of 6 Attack of the Swarm adventures. Written, of course, by Thurston Hillman. That's why he's here joining us, talking all about it. I just want to warn everyone, we're going to go through the adventure a little bit, so there'll be some spoilers to what's going on. So if you're planning on playing this or don't want to hear it, just turn the volume down real low and wait for us to move on from giving those. We're going to talk a little bit about some inspirations, how the adventure got developed, and some tips and tricks maybe for GMs, and then maybe we'll take some questions at the end. Sound good, Thirsty?
Absolutely, sounds good to me.
Awesome, cool. So this being the fifth adventure, things are really starting to heat up. And in the just sort of give you all a general bit of background, in the Attack of the Swarm adventure path, the PCs are members of the Suscalon Defense Force, an army that is trying to fend off an attack of the Swarm from their home planet. Spoiler alert from the very first volume, they're not very successful in that matter, and the Swarm has taken over their world and is devouring it up whole. So it's up to the PCs to try to figure out a way to defeat the Swarm, or at least this particular incarnation of it, drive them back and reclaim their home world. In the previous adventures, they've sort of, dealt with the civilian side of war. They've gone behind enemy lines, so to speak, going to a world that has already been conquered and mostly eaten up by the Swarm to get some valuable information. And then in the previous adventure, they were in a sort of monastery on a comet to get this relic, this artifact that will hopefully help them out. It's all sort of myth and legend until they get there and realize that it's true. This particular thing called the Crown of Hylax, Hylax being sort of an insectile goddess who was once worshipped by the people who were the Swarm, but is now mostly worshipped by Sheeran and other insectile creatures. No lava being, it's not a mythic fly swatter. It is a crown that is sort of was built by directed to be built by Hylax, decades and centuries ago. No one knows what it's good for until the PCs come along. And now they get to use it. But how do they get to use it, Thirsty? Tell me. Let's start with, as I was outlining this, I had some wild ideas. And I came to you to ask, hey, do you want to write one of these? And you picked this one for what reason?
Because, so as Jason just explained, like, you've got all of this big lead up, and then the whole adventure path goes off the rails in this one, and it's
Yes.
like, all right, so you know how you were in a monastery? That monastery actually leads you into a mindscape that is a mindscape representing the Swarm. So it's this like psychically created demi-plane that represents the Swarm, and kind of is how, like, their representation in this vast sort of demi-plane. And when I saw it, I was reading this outline, and I'm like, whoa, this adventure kind of is like, okay, the path is going okay, it's a bit strange. Wait, now we've jumped over and now we're in Doctor Strange land. Okay, sure. And then as I was reading it, I'm like, you know what, this is all sorts of wacky and crazy, like, in terms of what's going on. I'm in.
Yeah.
It was a great choice I made at that exact moment. There may have been moments where I regretted that
later on, exactly. Well, I was happy that you agreed to write this, because I knew that if anyone could take this on, it would be you. But also at the point where it's like, I was just like, it's the Swarm Mindscape representation of their hive mind. Go. A little bit of leaving it up to you in a lot of ways, just to know that, like, basically they've got this artifact, it needs powering up, they need to do something in the mindscape to do that. Step 3 ? Step 4, end of adventure.
Fill a mindscape with stuff. I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Just
Things
go for it.
happen.
And indeed, the whole Doctor Strange aspect is something that I was interested in evoking in that,
Oh yeah.
that we did, and sort of, hey, because you're physically in a mental space, and what does that mean, and what's going on, and what is even like this sort of, this is even beyond behind enemy lines. This is inside the enemy, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got, you talk about these monolithic bad guys, like the bugs from Starship Troopers or the Borg from Star Trek, right? Like, how do you defeat that kind of a creature? You kind of don't in a lot of ways. You can only sort of drive them back or defeat a small pocket of them, but the major force is still out there somewhere. I guess in Starship Troopers they get the brain bug, right, and they're able to do something with that. I can't quite remember the details, but they're able
Are
to,
we talking the movie or the books? Like,
whichever, whichever you're most familiar with. But they do something there, and are able to defeat the bugs on their planet. But then, and with the Borg, they do kind of things like introduce a virus into that gives them personalities and independence and whatnot. And that's sort of where I was coming from when I got to this point in the adventure path in terms of uh, this is a war story, but what is how could it be more spacey and more science fantasy-y?
I was supposed to say, like, because the crown concept and going into the mindscape just was this whole amount of like science fantasy, like
Mhm.
that sort of magical fantasy element. Which, again, as I read it, I'm like, oh yeah, totally, I'm on board with this, and
Yeah.
this is going to be great. I have all these wacky, crazy ideas, and then I opened up the Word document, and I'm like, all right, title by Thurston Hillman, like
Got it.
adventure background. All right, Act One. How is treasure gonna work? Like, just these moments
Yeah.
of
It is a big question because the game has that basis. You need to get treasure, you need to get credits, and you need to be
Mhm.
able to maybe buy and sell things in the middle of adventure so you maintain that gear curve, right?
Yeah.
So you came up with some out there ideas that end up basically work. They work in a great deal, and I want to kind of go through them a little bit as we and ask you some questions. That's sort of at the beginning when the PCs first enter this mindscape, they don't really know where they are, they don't really know what's going on, and that is represented by the fact that everything is just blanketed in this fog.
Yeah.
And
And this was
then
weird too, because
yeah,
like when I got the adventure, normally when I write an adventure, it's like, okay, and the players are starting, X number of days or weeks or months after their last adventure,
yeah,
and like they've had time to prepare for this new thing. Because usually a lot of our adventure paths have that sort of like expected, like, okay, this is when you're going to do your crafting, this is when you're going to do all this
hmm,
stuff. This adventure is literally like at the end of the previous adventure you
right.
step through a portal and bam, this
This
adventure
is
starts.
yeah, yeah. There's nowhere like where we have that travel time built in, going to
Oh yeah.
places that take days and days and days. But this one, no, you start, and we do give the reprieve of. It counts as if you've rested for 8 hours,
Yeah.
and you get all your
I,
stuff
I
back, so you're not immediately killed after. Because the end of the previous adventure has like 6 fights in a row, basically, that you get no relief from as the
yeah.
swarm attacks the comet. So this, yeah, meant to be a little bit of like that. Oh, you get that tiny reprieve, and then you're stuck in a place where you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know where anything is, and it's out to get you. Right? You're a foreign body inside of a system that does not want you there.
Yeah, and that was something that I like immediately sort of, I don't know, gravitated to when I was writing it, was the concept that, like, okay, the players have entered, their characters are in this mindscape. Well, mindscapes, to be successful, have to have a means of combating foreign bodies.
Mhm.
Otherwise, any psychic can just go into the swarm mindscape and cause
Start wrecking it
havoc.
up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like a lot of how I structured it at first, with having this storm of fog that, like, okay, the PCs don't know what's going on, and there's this mystery at first because essentially they've come in and all the defenses have turned on,
Yeah.
and they're kind of like slowly going through.
And if you're GMing this, you would definitely want to play that up, right? You're gonna have to like maybe not even have maps at that point. You might do a little bit of theater of the mind during that first fight when
Mhm.
these swarm creatures come at you, right? They're probably at this point familiar swarm creatures to your players. These basically mind reapers that come in with their bone protrusions in their arms, and they come at you, but they're also different, right? They're made out of mindscape material. Their mental capacities are a little. they're at least slightly different. So you want to play that up a bunch, and when they fight, you fight them, and then they explode into psychic energy. That's going to throw your players for a loop, right? And then you just want to keep pressing on them for a little bit, for at least those first couple encounters where things are weird. There's a giant storm, and it's starting to affect you. There's a mirage that's pulling you in and trying to suck you into a sense of complacency. So yeah, you want to just kind of hammer that home for a bit, so PCs don't know where they are and what they're doing, and it becomes foreign to them, so that when they get that lifeline, which they do eventually, they want to grab onto it, right?
Yeah.
And follow that breadcrumb trail to a point of safety, so they can get their bearings and figure out what to do next.
Which, I mean, we give them this lovely breadcrumb in the
Mhm.
form of kind of this NPC that's sort of a vestige of the mindscape itself,
Mhm.
and is kind of leading the PCs. But then right after that, we sort of, yank that out of them and give
Oh,
them like
sure.
a big terrifying storm that they have to deal with.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you know where. Well, yeah, you get that little hint, and then you know where to go. And that storm, that weird storm, ends up being like a very interesting encounter, because it is randomized in a lot of ways. What happens? It's not about a fight. It's not necessarily about survival. You want to talk about like where that came
Yeah.
from?
So I was like, okay, one thing that I wanted to do was have some kind of environmental hazard. I'm like, it's a mindscape. This has to be very different than,
Mm.
okay, we make a survival check to hunker down or whatnot. So I thought one thing that would be interesting was having this sort of randomized storm, but have it key off of like different skill checks. Like the idea that like, okay, on a 2, the like voices start coming out of the storm and like assailing you, and you can actually use diplomacy to like talk the
Right.
voices down.
Tell them to shut
And
up.
yeah, exactly. And just doing different things to sort of deal with this odd. And it's really meant to reinforce that, you aren't in Kansas anymore kind of thing.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
everything here can work sort of differently.
And I can imagine that. I mean, depending on the group makeup of the characters playing this, it might have been a thing that where all the players have decided to make these grunts, right? These soldiers that are just
Mhm.
used to war, being thrown into this kind of environment is going to be just, yeah, like you said, pulling the rug out from
Oh
underneath them. It's hopefully a lot of fun, but also disorienting for the characters, but fun for the players, right? Um, so eventually we get, this NPC, which is it's called Independence, and it is sort of a ghost of the former Independence, the former individuality that of the Kucharn species, which were the bug species who were the swarm before they were the swarm, and from which the Sheeran eventually broke off. So what I wanted to do, as I was we were looking through this, I realized we should illustrate this person,
yeah.
right? Because why, we want to show it too. And I realized this is the perfect opportunity for us to essentially give our players a vision of what the Kucharm might have looked like. And this is it basically ends up being a cross between what you know of from swarm physiology and what you know of Sheeran physiology. And I want to show everyone an illustration of this one. There's
Yeah.
Independence right there. So you can kind of see it's got the Sheeran kind of neck and general face, but it's got those phalanges on the side are very much sort of taken from swarm physiology. And again, it's kind of got this blue ghost like thing, because it is essentially just a echo of a memory of a fragment, right? And it basically is helpful to it draws you to this place where you can be maybe momentarily safe or have a base of operations in this strange foreign land. By the way, this excellent piece is by Michelle Giorgi. Again, kudos to the artist. I'm trying to remember to give all the artist name for all the illustrations we see here today. So once we get into this sort of refuge, which is again sort of a manifestation of what's been going on, created by Independence here, it's not necessarily all safety, right? There's still some stuff that happens, and before you can even get in there, there's two things that happen before you even get there. Besides that connection storm, there's two other just out there things that you did, Thirsty, with this adventure. The first one being, there's two of them that happen as the course of this adventure.
Yeah.
Visions, essentially, that the PCs get, where they get to see what's kind of going on back in the real world, but not just straight up, static visions like watching a TV. Let them know what's going on there.
Yeah, yeah. So One thing I thought that was kind of important was like give something to keep the PCs motivated, because once they get in the mindscape and they've got this place that they're like, oh, we can sort of rest here and recoup. You want that sense of tension, and time sort of takes on a wibbly wobbly meaning when you're
Yeah.
in a mindscape. So what I introduced was the concept of these encounters where, because they're in the swarm's mindscape, the PC's consciousness kind of goes along for a ride into the material plane, except they find themselves controlling elements of the swarm in the material plane. So in like the first instance of this, the PCs kind of find themselves like each of them is inhabiting a CR10 swarm creature, like a
Mhm.
Thresher Lord from Alien Archive, and they appear in these like massive tank bodies during this attack that's happening on the comet that they ran out of at the end of the last adventure, because the defenders are still there fighting the
Yeah.
swarm, and so it's these defenders who are being attacked, and the idea is that the PCs can essentially like try to resist the swarm from wanting to kill these people and sort of take control of these Thresher Lords and turn against the swarm, but in doing so they risk hurting themselves, because
Mhm.
there's synaptic feedback that's
Yeah.
going in because the swarm doesn't want them to do this, or the PCs who may be a little less moral, good aligned,
Mm.
neutral aligned, they could just decide, I'm just gonna go along because I don't want to hurt myself and mulch some random NPCs.
Mm.
And so I put this in there as kind of this alternate sort of weird encounter where the PCs have to make some decisions of like, okay, are we gonna fight this and try to save these people, but also risk ourselves?
Mm.
There was a lot of I think just like fun elements to that encounter, because it was something so different. And it
Mhm.
also led to a sidebar name, which Jason had to change in
I had to have
development.
to change it. Yeah.
Yeah, which was referencing a old Call of Duty game where you did something similar in an airport, and it was not a good time. But in a similar state here, it's kind of like, yeah, the players who kind of want to be awful people have a release valve if they are terrible, terrible people.
Well, I sort of also framed it to a little bit of like the more self-serving PCs don't want
Yes.
I don't want to get hurt by tempting to save these monks in this monastery. However, what they end up having to do then is have to deal with the psychological effect of just staying in the body and watching as their so-called body murders someone that they were maybe friends with or got to know
Absolutely.
in the previous adventure. And I mean, I think we can. I don't have a problem with possibly saying the name of that sidebar. It wasn't like it was offensive or anything. Um,
Oh, yes.
and what there
Well,
was the exact reference to, if you
yes,
want
because
to.
for the Call of Duty game, it was the infamous mission, No Russian, which you
Mhm.
can Google and find all sorts of background on. It was kind of this shocker mission in an old game where you were in an airport and had the option of gunning down a lot of innocent people.
Right.
So when I put this sidebar in, knowing that like there are some players who might just
Just do
say,
that. Yeah.
"Man, I'm in a Thresher. I'm gonna murder everything, and I don't care." So I put in the sidebar and just was like, "No, Sheeran." And I was very pleased at the PaizoCon that year. You came up and were like, "I got that reference." And
Yeah, it was just such a such a fairly big moment in gaming at the time that
yeah,
well, having not actually played that mission or that game,
oh yeah,
Newton
a
got
lot
the
of people
reference.
know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of people know it. And I do enjoy the Easter eggs every once in a while. But I just didn't want to keep
Oh,
that
I
particular one
believe I
to
gave you like
encourage.
a sidebar
Oh,
of
sure, yeah,
please no
yeah.
or comment.
I need to write this down, but
Yeah.
don't use it. I get that. I totally get the feeling. Um, and once that sort of happens, and then just to sort of jump forward again later on, there's actually a full starship combat where the
Yes.
PCs are in control of a swarm starship against another swarm starship that is attacking an innocent sort of transport. And you get to basically, give the PCs stats and be like, okay, now who's going to be the gun? Who's going to fire the crazy guns on the swarm dread lancer? So
Yeah.
hopefully that'll be a lot of something interesting to jump and an adventure that's already chock full of weird stuff and even a nice little side dish of weird.
Well, I love the idea that as you're going through the strange mindscape where everything is not as it should be, the GM suddenly pulls out the starship combat mat and puts it
Right.
down on the table, and as the players, you're like,
What,
what's
where,
go?
who?
I mean, for my perspective, it was I was writing a Starfinder adventure, so I wanted to include at least one
Yeah.
starship combat, and I found a way to do it. But I did love this sort of just jumping element to again keep the tension going. And
Mhm.
as you're GMing this, those are included as tools to help you kind of remind the PCs that no, you have a mission, and as
Mhm.
you're not doing this, bad things are still happening
Yeah.
where you're from.
And it's not so much that maybe they're not doing it. It's just like, hey, this is taking time. Obviously, you've got to still figure it
Oh yeah.
out. But hopefully, this is sort of underline the that this is a war that's still going
Hmm.
on. So again, you've defeated the possibly the other swarm within the swarm bodies, and you're still there. It is. There's the refuge, there in the distance, looking like some buildings that you can go inside, and maybe that are slightly familiar or not. And but it's not all that easy, is it?
Nope.
Standing
Nope.
outside are two giant statues, which, of course, if you see any giant statue in a role playing game, you know it's going to come to life and attack you. These though, like you did something. These aren't just sort of big, sort of animated constructs that are sort of brought to life through the force of the psychic nature of the mindscape. There's something going on here too. It actually ends up being a combat where you can act full tactically and also possibly inspired by video games, right, Thurston?
Oh yeah. I mean, I would never be inspired by video games. But I like with this encounter, which these two statues have a lot of unique abilities. And one thing I love about Starfinder, just as someone who writes for it, someone who develops for it, is the ability to just go off the beaten path with abilities. Like
Mm,
with how our creature creation system works, it's very robust in that, okay, here's the numbers you have to put in place. But once you've done that, you have a ton of liberty to add special
mm,
abilities and add unique effects. And so one thing I love is in anything I do is like the quintessential boss battle.
mhm.
And so I wanted at the end of this, just before they're about to get in the refuge and have some like moment to rest, I wanted the PCs to have to deal with a boss battle. And that's what these two statues are. And what I did was each of them sort of had different focuses. Like one of them kind of stays away from the PCs, one of them goes like closes in on the PCs, and they like one kind of has some spell casting, the other one is more just smashy focused, but they share a hit point pool, and you kind of have to keep them like you have to do a lot of battlefield control. And I don't want to give away like everything about the
Sure.
encounter, but like you kind of have to control where they are and monitor like, okay, are we actually hurting them as we're doing stuff?
Right.
Do we have to reposition them? And that was a lot of fun.
And you can suss out what these weaknesses are as they are occurring in battle. So if there's some skill checks in there, some like sense
Yeah.
motive and stuff like that, and then you can be like, oh, this person really, and stuff that you'll just figure out like, oh, when we flank this person, we get an extra bonus. Oh, we should be flanking
Mhm.
them, right? Or this one is this statue is really like staying away. Maybe I can use that to my advantage.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this big boss battle happens. Again, fight these, and there's a lot of I'll just say there's a lot of big creatures in this particular adventure path.
Yes.
At the end of the adventure path, the 5 and 6, but 5 especially, there's like multiple huges happening, at least a gargantuan. And it's going to be end up being make your PCs kind of definitely feel like big heroes at this point
Pull
in
out
the
the big
adventure.
minis. Put those
Pull out the
big
big
minis on.
minis, yeah, pop them on there. So and then when we get to this refuge now, this sort of we eventually here's where we answer the treasure question, right? The marketplace question. This particular place is a model off an old Hylaxian refuge, basically a place where people who worship Hylax could meet and trade and be friends, because Hylax is a god of diplomacy and contact and stuff like that. And there ends up being sort of like you meet Independence, you have a nice conversation. And Independence is like, yes, I know you're. The fact that you're physical beings in this mindscape have basically awakened me, but have also sort of awakened the swarm defenses, right? You can use this place to rest. I don't know what you're supposed to do here yet, though. Independence doesn't have all the answers yet, but this you can sort of clear the space out. There's some other sort of Mindscape entities still lingering, based on the quote unquote like bad feelings of the swarm towards that sort of thing.
Bit of a mini dungeon kind of feel.
Yeah,
at
the little
that
tiny
point.
mini
Sort of
dungeon.
clearing out some rooms, finding out some more history, getting
getting some more clues,
some lore. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And then you find basically a sort of what was a marketplace, and then these spirits sort of rise up, and essentially it works as a settlement that you can just buy and sell stuff that ends up being sort of quote unquote like Mindscape credit. And I love the way that you sort of made it. It's like it's a Mindscape. Why can't we just imagine a bigger gun, right? But the way you put it in there was sort of like these things become more real through the ritual of paying credits for them.
Yes, because there's like a significance in offering up something like that you would value in the real world, but that you would value by giving it up, and you can also do like barters and trades. But I also, for this sort of marketplace, one thing that I really enjoyed putting in, it was kind of the reason I did this. I just loved this idea that you would go to a marketplace and like the Sheeran equivalent of Nikola Tesla and Leonardo da Vinci would be the people selling you stuff.
Yeah, these are well, we didn't have any big names to sort of throw in there in that yet, so we had to make up some people for this. But basically there's an explanation. Well, this Sheeran was instrumental in discovering a cure, but she lost her life in the process. Or this Trox is from before the Gap, right? And was a big proponent of Hylax all the way back then. And his basically his not his ghost, not really his soul or anything, but just sort of the memory of him is there selling you weapons.
Yeah. And so it was interesting to do that, and solved a big question that I had as I was writing this thing of like, how do give treasure and money, and also how do the PCs kind of spend that, because it's still a whole adventure path volume, and as any GM out there knows, it's incredibly difficult when you have like a player who maybe who specializes in a certain build, and it's difficult to like feed that build if they require a certain item type or a certain piece of equipment that maybe doesn't show up. So we included the bazaar to deal with that.
Exactly. And you added a thing there that like certain things that they do while they're in the Mindscape as they continue an adventure, and even while they're sort of clearing out that sort of little dungeon area, sort of act as treasure in a way. Like instead of giving out a cred stick that has 10,000 credits on it, you sort of get 10,000 credits worth of credit,
bucks,
exactly, at that bazaar that you can spend to sort of continue to beef yourself up. Lava beings also basically assuming that Gapnesia, in quotes, is still a thing in the Mindscape. Yeah, exactly. These people don't necessarily know what happened during the Gap, or all these beings are probably not anytime from the Gap, but before the Gap and after the Gap are still fair game.
And they also like aren't necessarily 100% correct renditions. Like they're mindscapes. They're things that like can be different than what they might have actually been. They might, some of the NPCs, for example, might be, idealized memories of what they were and not what they actually were.
Sure, right. It's like going to like, oh, we're gonna meet Nikola Tesla, and it's David Bowie as Nikola Tesla in The Prestige, right? Like, oh, okay, well, that's not actually him, but I'll take it.
I'll take it. They can sell me goods any day.
Yeah, exactly. Let's sort of once the sort of they're ready to move on, sort of had to rest and stuff like that. That's when we sort of are able to give them the quest, right? And the first thing, one of the things I do, I almost forgot to bring up here, was the image of the Mindscape Mind Reaper that you fought, which is the second image there. Again, you can see it's sort of made out of mind stuff and sand and whatnot. So you can definitely recognize it as a swarm creature, but definitely it's got some weird bits to it. This one here, and I think the next couple ones we'll be seeing, were made by Mark Molnar and the people over at Pixeloid Studios. And then, so we're going to talk about this figure. The next day, she comes bursting in the door. Now, Thirsty, you had this NPC in the adventure, but I got so enamored with the idea of another physical being still in the Mindscape and acting as this sort of like survival Mad Max person who's just been living off the quote unquote land for years, being the sort of the guide for the PCs to help them out and figure out what to do next. So she comes bursting through the door. This is a Kasatha named Seneca, and she's like, "I've been here 30 years since the swarm war with the Vesk and the Pack World sort of fought the swarm. I've been stuck in this mind. I think I'd ever see a being of living flesh and blood." And here you are, hooray! And she wants to just basically like immediately wants to know who they are and what they're doing and how you know, and show off like her stuff, basically. Yeah, a bit like Simple Simon is saying, a little bit like Robin Williams in Jumanji, a little bit like that. Yeah, stuck in this thing, and she's basically had some Solarian mental training. She's able to basically like live off the land, even though it's not real food or real water or anything like that. So she comes in and she's like, yeah, I think, basically this is a place of mental energy. So you're going to need to take this crown to certain spots, around here, and maybe sacrifice some of your own being to empower this artifact. And she brings you on her sand barge, which is just another sort of, I don't know. I guess I got a little Star Wars reference here. This happens later on in the adventure during some of the travels on her sandbar. She's crafted out of her mindscape memories of stuff and old swarm husks and whatnot. You get sort of attacked by a storm, and this is poor Quig is barely holding on for his life in that, and is that's a fun, hopefully a fun piece that happens later on. That she says, "Oh, I'll take you to these places," and that was another thing too, Thirsty. So I was just trying to tell you what you had sort of done and how I wanted to tweak it a little bit. It was basically you had them sort of like going right, walking through the mindscape, and I thought that was fine and making maybe survival checks to figure out what it was. But I just wanted to kind of get them to the places quicker, right? I didn't want the travel, although stuff can happen while you're on the barge, where she might, Seneca might get lost or someone gets thrown overboard or something like that. So there's these travel events that happen to spice things up. But for the most part, I just wanted to go from these 4 points that the PCs have to visit, and empower the Crown of Hylax before they can defeat the final boss.
See, this, kids, is why developers are very important, because they can often read stuff and go, "That's okay, but let's do a giant sand barge," and that's way better.
Make it more awesome. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, I remember when I was going through it, I was like, "This is different, but I love it." I remember also you excitedly messaging me, being like, "All right, I love this person in the desert. They're gonna be the Kasatha now, and Mad Max."
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why I decided. I thought that was yours, but I guess I just decided Kasatha for some reason. Man. But you still had this figure. It's not like this is out of nowhere. This NPC, right? Well, did you have sort of a similar thought that sparked such joy in me that like it would be awesome if there were a real person in here as well?
I was trying to look, because one of the things that I'd also included, and I don't know if it made it into the final, was also the idea that like some militaries had sent in like commandos into the mindscape at some point, and like you'd find their corpses and be like, "This is real treasure. What is this?" Because in a science fantasy setting, like there is that ability for, maybe it's not a ton of beings, but like we've all seen player characters when they get their hands on new resources. I mean, it's safe to assume that a player character in another part of the galaxy got their hands on a cult adventure and decided to jump into the mindscape of the swarm. Yeah. So that was sort of the way I wanted to approach it too. It was also adding a bit of like, you're not necessarily the first or potentially the last people to come in here.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that's so weird that it's not like commonplace, right? But something might happen. And I had Seneca basically sort of accidentally end up here, and basically worried about surviving for forever. What was I going to say next? Oh, speaking of things that sort of end up protruding. So you visit a bunch of spaces. You visit like basically some gives you a little bit of history of what the God Host, is sort of the main baddie of the AP, is all about. You go to an oasis that basically tries to take your memory, steals your memories a little bit. You go to a kind of ruined looking city where it's just kind of like representative of the swarm thinking about invading the other planet in the Susquehanna system. So the buildings kind of look familiar, and they're fighting. You watch some swarm finish off some, basically ghosts of other swarm SDF soldiers. And then you fight them, right? And those sort of like areas are meant to sort of empower the crown. I think this was basically familiar stuff. As you empower the crown, you have to make sacrifices of your own PCs that sort of stick around for this adventure. And the whole Crown of Hylax empowerment thing, I think, is kind of cool because you get this thing that gives you new stuff that you can do, but you only get it for this adventure, so it can be maybe a little overpowered here and there. But also, it's also making up for the fact of it's as you sacrifice bits of yourself, like, oh my gosh, for the rest of the adventure, I have to basically my stamina points are 15 lower, which which is a non-zero chunk that you might be the difference between life and death. But the crown gives you maybe some healing abilities, right? So it's sort of this fun trade-off that you get to play with.
Yeah,
so
like once you get it fully powered, we have a sidebar in there that talks about here like some mindscape abilities too that come into play because the crown has its effects, and then later on in the adventure we introduce like mindscape abilities that again let you do some of that kind of Doctor Strangey sort of, you can alter gravity, or you can recharge spell casting, or get some healing. And I think that just kind of empowers the PCs, but also makes it feel different again, which is sort of the goal here of like, okay, here's this unique thing we can do for this particular part that won't work in like regular Starfinder ever, but in this controlled manner, we're good.
Quote unquote controlled. So these particular places are basically, this becomes possibly pun intended sandboxy. There's like 4 or 5 places you can visit. You can do it in any order, and there's some events that sort of pop up, like you get attacked on the sand barge, or you have that that starship combat that's in the real world. And then you make it back to the refuge, and Independence does the last bit of the ritual to fully empower the crown. And but then speaking of things invading, I like the event called Invasion from the Material Plane. Where the swarm sends their own troops in to fight you. And this is a new swarm creation that is also created by you there, Thirsty, known as a Ceratorum. And these guys are bonkers. They are, they got a little bit of a, not to infringe on certain IP, but a little bit of certain tentacle mouth possibilities that are pretty awesome. And they have they're like basically the psychic tanks of the swarm ecology, right? And they come at you, and they're real.
I remember creating these and sort of the goal of like, okay, yeah, like I think the outline even said I want like the psychic swarm creature. But then when I was going through it, I was like, all right, well, let's take a look at every like weird psychic kind of spell that we have in Starfinder at that point, and just going through the list and being like, oh, okay, like synaptic pulse is a pretty cool thing. Oh, what if we gave them some abilities that keyed off of those as well? So things like being able to mind thrust and then trigger a synaptic pulse. So it's things that but it's really good at them and it's specialized in them, so it can do all of these things.
How does it taste with garlic sauce? Probably terrible. I imagine swarm all taste bad. That's a good defense mechanism. I mean, they're immune to acid, so they've got to probably be just gross to eat.
I don't know though. We don't have any kind of ability that says they're gross to eat though. So
that's true.
We've done that for some creatures. So.
That's true. And, I guess to each their own. And then you have this sort of like, then you have to have the defense of the refuge as the mindscape sort of ramps up its battle against you. You have a fight. Independence kind of sacrifices themselves so that to give you those mindscape powers. And that's the sort of thing that I want to talk about real quick too. We have like 4 sort of little real brief on the mindscape powers that sort of like alter gravity and maybe like give yourself a bonus to this D20 roll. And the adventure says give 2 to each PC here at this point, and they're able to use them once per basically rest, right? Once per 10-minute rest for stamina. But we don't say which ones to give to who, because we don't know your players. We don't know your player characters. And just sort of we want to find out which ones would be the best. Obviously, the ones for recharging your spells, you should give to a spellcaster. The ones maybe like that where people can heal themselves, maybe give that to the tank so that they can continue to stay in the fight. Like the skill-based character even wants to be better at skills, gives them that sort of like every once, add a d6 to the roll or whatever. So you're going to want to tailor that to make your characters feel even more cool.
Yeah. And if you have ideas too, like this is the perfect opportunity to throw in something that might be super tailored for a player in your party, because when you're running an adventure path as the GM, you have control to make those decisions. So if you have someone who's got just some weird like CMB based trip crazy build, then maybe you give some ability that lets them trip like 5 things, or those kind of powers. That this is an opportunity to do that and have it be in a controlled environment, and not the typical GM problem of, all right, I'll give you this special ability in hopes it doesn't break the rest of the campaign. Oh no, it's broken the rest of the campaign. You're just breaking a little bit of the campaign.
Yes, just for like the last third of this book might be a little bit broken, but that's the point. And we ramp the difficulty is a little ramped up there at the end too. That makes it so much. And eventually, you've got the crown. You've got to take it to this, and there's sort of been hinting at it through the adventure, this being called the Connection, which represents the connection of the sub-colony that's attacking your home planet to the rest of the swarm. You put the crown on this being's head, and that's the goal. That's the goal of the adventure. So you got to get to that person first. You have to go racing across the mindscape, and this is where I kind of wanted to go back to that barge, Thirsty. You kind of like had it like happen, you're just there, closer there. I just went, let's throw in this thing where that barge storm happens, right? And you crash. Seneca crashes, and you're able to climb up onto this spot where you weren't able to get to before. You fight a couple small armies. This is another thing too. I don't think you had the troop rules when you were doing this. So I just
no. I did not have them yet. So yeah.
So yeah, 2 big troops basically, which are hundreds and hundreds of creatures attack you, and you run through there and you climb up this wall, and then you get to the spot where there's crazy floating islands, and then you fight the Connection, which is gargantuan in size. It's just massive swarm, and I want you to say it because it's you deserve to let everyone know what this thing can do a little bit.
So this is actually based off of an old adventure path that I used to do with in publishing, where they had this crazy end boss, and like we were designing it at the time, and one of the jokes was like, okay, it's going to be like those bosses at the end of a Final Fantasy game. It does everything. It calls down lasers from the sky. It spell casts. And I just remember pitching like, what if it like could hurl islands at you? And that was a bit too far, but not in this adventure. No. In this adventure, the Connection that you fight as the last boss just has an ability entitled Hurl Island, and it's exactly what you would think it is. As you're fighting in this area of like spinning floating islands, it can move and
one up at you,
smash it, hurtling it into you. And yeah, that does a bunch of damage. And then it's got a lot of other swarm kind of abilities. But I just love the idea of having this gargantuan 20 by 20 foot creature that's also knocking floating islands into you.
Right, and this fight takes place over like a giant pit as well. So it's like you're on this sort of central dais pillar kind of situation, and you could fall, but you don't necessarily fall to your death because it's a mindscape. It just goes off the rails again, like we said. But all you're trying to do though is put a crown on this guy's head. Yeah. So if you can do that in like round 1. And then it gets a will save, right? And basically, the more you beat up on it, the sort of easier it is for this to happen. If it fails the will save, it finishes. It finishes the fight, right? If you manage to do that right away, great, good. You've basically figured out the trick. And I guess your GM also rolls garbage, a garbage will save, but you still have to throw it on there. But or you can just do an attrition and just beat up on it until it's 0 hit points, in which it sort of shrinks down to normal size, and you're able to just sort of easily plop that crown right on there.
Yeah.
And then, basically, what happens there is you almost immediately transported back into the real world where you came from. You get to have a final sort of fight with the swarm, who are all dazed and confused because of all this, to sort of show off what the importance of what you've done, and get to move on to the next adventure, which is back to war.
Yeah. Out of crazy mindscapes.
Right.
We're
Yes.
done with
Oh,
that.
we're done with that. Get to other crazy stuff. But and again, sort of again talk about answering the treasure question is like, by the grace of Hylax, all of that stuff you bought was real now.
Yeah.
So luckily we can do stuff like that where I
Yes.
feel like that makes enough sense.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think players will be arguing with you to be
Right.
like, but my gear shouldn't exist. All right then.
Okay, I'll take it away. Yeah. So that's basically the adventure in a 45-minute nutshell. You also wrote this sort of we have an article in here about mindscapes, sort of explaining them, how they work in Starfinder. It is an established thing. Oh, and here's the opener for that.
Oh gosh, yes.
How's that? Sammy Khalid is just so good. It's a uplifted bear dreaming of simpler armored times in the forests of the mind. So good. I forgot to mention also that that previous swarm was illustrated by Gray Herb, whose stuff I just adore. But this is just so stylish and exciting.
Oh, yeah.
So this article basically, again, I just said like we have Mindscape rules in Pathfinder, right? You can just sort of give them a little bit of a tweak and an update.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we put them in here, included some things like a lot of it was looking at some of the old occult adventure rules and putting them over into Starfinder to make sure that we had that connectivity, but then also including some interesting things like notable mindscapes, like what kind of mindscapes exist in Starfinder already, and you get a sense of some of those. I love this art piece just because it's even the intro quote for it is essentially from an uplifted bear who's saying this stuff, and then I just adore that you went with that art piece because it's great. And then there's another uplifted bear art piece in this article too, which we don't have a picture of, but is still amazing.
You'll get and see it. This was another one where you order a piece of art and you're not really sure how it's going to turn out because you're like, this is a bear dreaming of another bear.
A simpler bear.
Oh my goodness, a simpler bear, simpler times. And it just stunning. Came out so stunning. The Mindscape rules you can also use to sort of model in a way virtual reality in the Starfinder setting. It's because it's not really real, but it could be, like the Swarm Mindscape is when you take damage in there, it's real damage. So you can also do that. Like, hey, it's a virtual reality that has feedback. Haptic feedback on it, right? That's when you take damage, you take real damage, or not. You can always just be it's all a dream situation, right? And then we have an archetype in here for basically someone who's good at mindscapes and can
kind of like bring them into the material and
pull people into duels, psychic duels, so you can have that fun scene. And then yes, definitely Shades of the Matrix. And then finally, we have just an article that's just called Psychic Magic, which has got more spells and some technomancer tricks. Another Mystic Connection that was written by Hillary Moon Murphy, and it's been, from what I've seen on the forums, been received very well. So, and it is an excellent piece. It's got some of those occult adventure spells that we've ported over to Starfinder, like Id Insinuation and Ego Whip and Ectoplasmic Barrage or something like that. So fun stuff like that, and a new theme for like, hey, you grew up training your mind. As a sort of someone who's good at ESP and stuff, or we're subjected to terrible experiments, I guess. Any thoughts? Any final thoughts, Thirsty, before we see if there's any questions on the chat? And so, chat, if you got any questions, start throwing them up, and we can answer them.
Yeah, no, I will say that this was an excellent opportunity, and I really enjoyed getting to write something that was just so out there. Also, I never wanted to tell you this until now, but like the other reason I took this was you completed my Adventure Path bingo, so thank you.
No, I think you did mention that at some points. I wasn't going to turn you down. Like, I'm not going to let you get all 6 volumes.
How dare you? No, I'd been hunting for number 5 for a while. This was it.
I sort of half assumed you took it because it was a later due date than some of the earlier ones.
I mean, there's a lot. Let's be honest. There's a lot of reasons.
Fair enough. Fair
But
enough.
no, actually, this turned out to be just such a fun project for me to work on, because at
Mhm.
first it was very challenging, and then trying to figure out, like, how is this going
Mm.
to work from a, like, player facing, a GM facing sort of perspective, and then getting to put all that together, and then seeing how you kind of smoothed out the rougher parts of it. Very
Yeah.
happy with how this
Yeah,
turned
I'm
out.
real happy with how this one turned out too. And this is, again, as I mentioned, it's sort of like, hey, this is where the AP goes a little bonkers because just because as I was outlining it, it was like I can't have this be all war all the time, I guess, because we also talk
Yeah.
a little bit about Hylax and how that God stuff is important. I wanted to really get in there and do
Mhm.
something different, I guess. Um, let's talk about the psychic options in this volume. Asks
Yeah.
Joe Jungers, are they applicable to PCs in the AP or more designed for new PCs? A little bit of both. I mean, we have a
Yeah.
theme in there. But if you have all the volumes before you start playing, you can have one of your players that. But some of the spells are third, fourth, fifth, sixth level spells, right?
Yeah.
By location is one of the psychic spell options, which are. Oh, I should also mention too that some of those spells are available for witch warpers. We were in just at the right point so that we could throw them in there without just in case on a terrible accident that character operations manual didn't come out at the right time. We wouldn't be ahead of ourselves. So this just comes out right at the right time for that. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
bilocation is a spell that lets you be in two places at once, and if you want your PCs to be able to pick that up, because well, not sixth level spells, I guess, but some of the earlier ones for like the third level spells for this campaign were perfectly. Yeah, the swarm are not immune to mind effects,
Yeah.
so use them up.
Yeah, there's some really interesting ones in there too, and I do think it's something that is great for players of all levels, because there are those
Hmm.
spells available. There's themes for new characters,
Hmm.
like the connections, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's one of the things coming from the organized play side. Uh, the fact that you can pick up some of these books, like this one in particular, has a lot of player facing options, which is
Yeah,
nice, because you can pick up something like Adventure 5 in a series. You might not like be a GM, but you might really be interested in psychic magic, and you can
right.
pick this up to
I have
get
to grab
that.
this up.
Yeah.
Uh, Ectoplasmic Barrage is a 1 to 6 level spell, so it like Mind Thrust. It scales, has some scaling stuff on there, and that's not even hey, you can just it's not a mind affecting spell, so you can use that against anybody practically.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of good stuff on here. I just also mentioned how Joe Junkers loved the Trox Priest. I have a soft spot for Tuva, the Trox Priest in the previous volume as well. She turned. I mean, the art of her turned out so good on that
Oh
one that
yeah.
I just like. That's the thing about the Trox too. They are big bugs with like big sharp teeth, but they're just softies, right? They're just they're not as terrifying as they might seem.
I too love trucks, but I also included one in a romantic relationship with a naga in an adventure.
Oh, no. Okay, okay. Is this
Spo-
a
oh god.
Starfinder SFS
No,
scenario
no,
or
no.
a
This is a
earlier?
Pathfinder. This is a
Sure.
Pathfinder Adventure Path.
Okay.
And if you're ever interested, you should check out Iron Fang Invasion #4,
Very
where
nice.
there is an excellent piece of artwork, and that is both the Trox and the Naga in the same piece of
I'm
artwork.
I'm gonna have to go look at that when we're done here because I didn't know that.
Yes, yes.
Um, terrific, terrific. Love it. Uh, I guess Thirsty, you could maybe answer the question about how much of this psychic magic is going to be coming to SFS
Yeah, so I
from.
can talk a bit about this. I don't want
Yeah,
to get into specifics of
yeah, no,
what's
yeah,
going to be
because
allowed,
I
not
think you're
allowed
still
yet.
working on it, right?
Yeah, I'm actually in the process right now of wrapping up the sanctioning on this adventure path so that it will be all playable for Starfinder Society credit. I'm waiting on a few bits of feedback from our additional resources team, which is a group of some volunteers who go
Hmm.
through and read some of our material to give it kind of a second look to see if it's suitable for org play. But yeah, a lot of the stuff is looking really good, and I'm excited to get it out there. I don't want to give an exact time of when the sanctioning in the AR will hit, but I will
Sure.
say probably sooner than you think. So
Hooray. And I guess
yeah,
having Hillary Moon Murphy, who is big in the society, write this kind of like didn't hurt at all to have her. So she knows what might fly in a society game more than some other freelance authors, right? So So that's probably why it might be turning out pretty good. And I should, well, while we don't have any questions, just quickly want to go through some of the stuff that it's in the Alien Archives in the back. We didn't talk about that. We have a something just called an imposter, which is I think our managing editor Judy mentioned, is basically you get to punch your imposter syndrome in the face. So it's basically someone from the who basically comes in is like, oh, you're no good, and looks exactly like you. So that's a good thing. We have
that one?
That's Gabriel Luconis, our
Nice.
previous project manager. Yeah, I gave him some. He wanted to write some stuff, and I was like, "Want to write this?" He's like, "I'm thinking about something like," because we have things like in Pathfinder, like the ego shade and other things that were kind of like this, but I wanted to give this a twist. We've got a big psychic raven in here, known as a Munine, a psychic abomination, which is just no one really knows what it looks like because it's so terrible, but it kind of has lots of tentacles, of course. A Valnarum, which is kind of a winged tiger leopard thing with 4 eyes. It looks pretty awesome. Both those were written by Emily Care Boss, who's a friend of mine, but who's also a excellent game designer in her own right. She's written a lot of like games about romance and stuff like that. So you should check out her work, her personal work. Misery Core, that's the word I was looking for. And then we've got a kind of an anti-magic giant known as a YouTube.
Yeah, I was just seeing the art on that one. I haven't looked too much. That's pretty cool. And also I noticed that 2 of them are on the planet that's in the
that's true.
Codex of
Yes,
Worlds entries.
So they were all written by the same person, who I've forgotten who that is. Oh, that must be Louis Rozanka. Yeah. So yes, a PC races. Unfortunately, Joe Jungers, none in this one. We sort of took a little step back this particular AP in presenting playable species, but that doesn't mean there won't be some in the future, for sure.
Alien Archive 3's got you covered.
Alien Archive 3 is way got you covered. And a question from my friend Bacon Golem here, who is basically like a giant that is morally opposed to magic. It's more or less when you cast a spell on this giant, it might turn into a different spell. And he's got basically like a anti-magic, like a wild magic kind of field about him. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and he just kind of has like cool spikes all over his body. He looks pretty awesome. Spike body. Cool. I don't know if we have any other questions. I don't know if I have any other final thoughts. I think, I'm fairly certain that next week, I'm going to be talking to Ron Lundeen about the final volume of this adventure path. If not next week, then before the end of February, that's for sure. So very soon we'll be talking about that. And Thirsty, you want to say anything exciting coming up in Starfinder Society that you can talk about, that you're excited about?
Starfinder Society.
Sure, why not?
What is not exciting?
You don't have to give any big bombshells here, but
No. Well, as I said, we're working a lot right now on sanctioning. I'm currently doing a lot of like convention season stuff. We're hoping in the next couple of weeks, maybe probably in the next like month or two, giving a bit more information on hey, what our next season is going to be like. So stay tuned for some of that, because that's going to be pretty important. I'm only half stalling so I can give a better announcement.
I can see the glow of the monitor.
Yeah, I know. It's like
you're looking something up frantically.
I've got the file folders here. Oh gosh. Yeah, no.
Sorry to spring that on you.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, this month we've got some pretty interesting scenarios coming. The product pages for them aren't up yet, but I know they've been announced in a few places. We have at the end of the month coming out the Infernal Gallery by Jessica Catalan, who's a newer author, also from here in Winnipeg, and yet I've never met, so that's cool. And that's going to be kind of a low tier Starfinder Society adventure where the players find a chunk of a place that's floating in the drift, and maybe the title gives you a bit of an idea what that's from. And the other one is a A Scoured Home by Christopher Wasco, which
Mm.
is taking us back to the planet of the Isilgoons, who, speaking of
Hey.
Alien Archive 3, the Isilgoons
Yeah.
are in there, and we're doing some stuff. So if you've been a Starfinder Society fan or just a Starfinder fan in general, highly recommend you check those out when they come out later this month.
Awesome.
Yay.
Yeah. And I think just sort of an AP news, you may have seen the product page for the first volume of a new AP called the Devastation Arc coming out. I've got a blog that's going to hopefully hit sooner rather than later, sort of giving you a lot of more details about what that AP is. And since it's our first high level AP, how high it goes and what's involved in all that. So keep an eye out on the website, keep an eye out on, our Twitters and whatnot to get all the good latest news.
I'm going to be a tease, though, because there is a piece of artwork from that AP that I know we probably aren't showing anytime soon.
I wish I could show it.
But oh my lord, when you see this piece of artwork, it is so good.
It's pretty good. And we're going to see a lot more of it when that AP comes out eventually this year, later this year. So that's all from me. That's all from Thirsty. Say goodnight. And at this point, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for tuning in and all your wonderful questions and all your wonderful comments. And and all the other Twitch shows that are happening here on Paizo Official. Check us out on Friday.
Right after this, we've got...
I don't know if we do.
Are we hosting?
I don't know if we do. I'm going to look over here at
Peyton will be able to tell if we're hosting anyone or not.
How can I help you, Jason?
Are we doing a thing after this? Is there more content?
We'll be playing Starfinder on her channel, which
we'll
be here in a moment.
All right.
Yeah,
let's go. Check it out. So stay tuned for that. And I'll hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye.